Hello, welcome back around the drum. This is Pixel Pro Audio's weekly show, Unfiltered. I'm Tay, this is Evan, and that is Chris.
Nope.
And today we are going to be doing a little history lesson about Novation as a company. I think we all know about Focusrite Novation, and especially Focusrite and where they kind of came from, especially with the Neve aspect to everything. But Novation added on at some point. I think Evan will let us know, but kind of like what the history is of Novation as a company. So, Evan, welcome around the drum.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, totally. So I guess if you could just start us out with kind of where Novation came into the Focusrite family.
Sure. So Focusrite and Novation are both British companies.
Mm-hmm.
Novation was founded in 1992 by Ian Janaway and Mark Thompson. And the first product that they made was called the MM10, and it was a portable battery-powered MIDI controller that was specifically made for the Yamaha QY10, which was like a portable workstation. Mm-hmm. So in tandem, it was one of the first portable workstations, and that's kind of how Novation got its start.
And that had keys on it, right? Mm-hmm. The MM10.
Mm-hmm. It's actually the same form factor as the base station and the base station 2, which you can kind of see back there. Yeah. So the base station, original base station, came out in '93, and Chris Huggett, who is basically the brains behind all the synths at Novation, took the shell of the MM10 and implemented his own circuitry. He also made the Wasp and the Oscar. And some other cool synths. And so he took the frame of the MM10 and created the original base station, which is probably our most famous synthesizer.
Okay.
Yeah. The MM10, I didn't realize that they started with a controller, actually, for another device, as opposed to like a synthesizer. I always thought they were always like a synthesizer company. So that's really interesting to hear that.
Yeah. That was the first thing they made. But I think the original base station is definitely what put Novation on the map. Mm-hmm. The MM10 was kind of, just their foot in the door.
Okay. How did the Nova come into play later on?
So that, I guess you could say it was shifting away from more analog synthesizers and into the digital realm in the 90s. And the Novas were super popular because of all the multi-effects and all the different, the amount of voices you could have on that synthesizer. And so I think it was just a product of the times of that digital sound and all the cool effects was, all the rage back then. And we're kind of seeing a resurgence of digital synthesizers with, all these different digital analog hybrids. I think digital's starting to come back into vogue, whereas, a couple years ago it was, all analog all the time. So I think the digital analog argument will continue until, the end of days.
Is it really like, I have to be digital and you have to be analog? And is there any middle ground in between?
Totally. And, my personal opinion is if it sounds good, who really cares? But, but I think Peak, which is our newest synthesizer, and we'll talk about that later, is kind of the best of both worlds. You get the digital oscillators, and the technology is so good these days to where you don't really run into any of the problems that you would with digital synthesizers back in the day. Like the aliasing isn't an issue anymore, but you still get that the analog grit that everybody wants.
Okay, yeah. Now you mentioned earlier when we were talking, the Peak has the FPGA chip inside as opposed to the old DSP chips, and so the advantage of that is the processing power. It's so much faster that you're not going to really have the anti-aliasing and stuff like that you were having before.
Right. So the chip inside of Peak runs at 24 megahertz. So it's generating the waves. The synthesizer oscillators are being generated at 24 million times a second. So you have the high resolution oscillators without having to worry about keeping them in tune. But if you want to put them out of tune and slew them a little bit and get that old analog flavor, that's something you can do.
Nice. That's awesome.
That is cool. Now, the other cool thing is the Peak also has the Oxford.
The Oxford oscillators.
Oscillators, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's Were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say, tell me about the Oxford.
Yeah.
So the Oxford oscillators is another technology developed by Chris Huggett, and you'll probably hear me talk about him quite a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about Chris and his role and in the development of the Novation product line as we look at the history and everything like that.
Sure. So he's been the brains behind pretty much all the major Novation synthesizers, and he's a consultant now, so he's still very much involved with Novation, and his oscillator technology is unique to him. So he's got the Oxford oscillators in the peak. He's got the WASP filter. It's a variation of the WASP filter, which is the same one that's in the base station, the original base station. This one's a little more involved, but it's based on the same technology, and his effects as well. So yeah, he's kind of a big deal.
The big guy, yeah. So it's interesting to hear you talk about like the original base station and how it was, in the form factor of the MM01, was it? 10. Yeah. Get my numbers backwards. And how the Oxford oscillators now that Chris developed, they're a part of the peak. So it seems like the history of the products that Novation has had has continued on and seems to be continuing on as you go forward into 2019 and beyond. Is that right?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That Novation builds upon its past successes, improves on them, and develops them into new products. So another recent example of that would be the SL Mark III, which is behind me here.
Behind you there.
So the sequencer on the SL Mark III is very similar to the circuit sequencer.
Okay.
So the circuit obviously came out before the Mark III. I think it was 2016.
Yeah.
But it has the same style sequencer on it on a beefy, MIDI hardware controller. So Novation's always improving on their technology and developing it into new and fun products.
Yeah, I like to see the progression of the controllers and the synthesizers. Like it's kind of just they've all kind of done this like staggering, but always moving forward for each type. So Novation kind of came from it was a controller at first, and then they made synths, and so it's kind of like a a relationship between them both. And some of the products now you can do both, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to see that progression evolve over time.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. We got our feet dipped into the controller market and the synthesizer market.
And all of that ties into the history of the products that you've been doing, and you've been doing well. You've had your successes, you've had your, maybe not so successes, but you're always learning. You're always growing, and you're always, coming up with, what the industry needs.
Yeah, and I will say it's been great working for Novation. And one of my favorite things about Novation is how well they listen to customers. If you look at the last couple of years, the amount of firmware updates that Novation's put out that, not just fix bugs, they're actually adding features to the product. And it's been great working for a company that, is respected because they respect their customers and they actually listen to what the customers are saying.
Absolutely.
Right. Like the circuit, when it first came out, it didn't have the sample import function, and that was all added later on. And that's one of the things that Novation is really good at, is supporting their product beyond the initial release. It's basically saying, hey, you know what? This is an organic product. It changes as the industry changes and as the user base, requests things, and it actually is they're able to make it happen, which is awesome.
Yeah. We got some smart guys over in the UK.
That's good.
Yeah.
So where do you see, I guess, like Novation taking things into the future? It's 2019 now, but you have this nice the SL Mark III, kind of like it's a hub. It can do everything. Control everything that you have, even the synthesizers that you have. But I guess like my question is maybe where would Novation go from here?
Right.
If you can say anything.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I can't give specifics or details, but I guess the legacy of Novation is anything to look at, that we've developed products, built upon them, and stayed true to who we are, making synths, making controllers, I think we'll just continue to improve on the technologies that we have, and we'll continue to innovate new technologies as well.
Good answer.
That's awesome. Well, that's all I have. Do you have anything, Tay?
No, that kind of that's a great overview, and kind of like shows where that kind of where they came from and where you guys are going. So
stay tuned.
Yes.
Yeah. The future looks bright, I think, for Novation and where the industry in general is going, and I can't wait to see what comes out next.
Yeah, usually with Focusrite Novation, they're always coming out with new products, whether it's annually or but usually right around January time is the NAMM time, so usually announcements come out around then, or so you never know. So we'll have to wait and see. But Evan, we really appreciate you joining us here today.
Yeah, anytime, guys. It's been a blast. Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you around the drum next time.
Tay, before we start, I have one question.
Hey, dude, do what you gotta do.
There, now we set the tone. Am I good right here?
Check 1, 2.
We were recording, right?
Yeah, we were. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Pixel Pro Audio's weekly show, Unfiltered.
Everything's recorded.
Awesome.